Okay. Right. So I think that we can begin, and really lovely seeing everybody over here. And I know it's an unreasonable hour for many. And we haven't had a share your story session for CHOL for what seems like really ages. And the real reason is, I think, mainly to do with me, because the last year and a bit, I've really been in survival mode, living my life day by day and not really being able to plan ahead or think too positively about many things. So I'm sorry, but here we are all together, and hopefully it's just going to be a really great meeting. I've always thought that there's something fascinating about crime fiction, or mystery and detective fiction, as it was once called. And I guess that it came from my childhood, where my father, a general practitioner, used to go to sleep at night with crime fiction thrillers next to his bed. There was always Ellery Queen and Ed McBain, and he would read, I think, a few books every week. And just today, I was thinking about it, that I never actually asked him why he likes reading that so much, but I think he would say to me it was just fun, and it was nice to keep his mind off his patients sometimes. So, but I definitely, it was part of our lives at home, these thrillers, as he called them. I remember we had, possibly many of you remember, some board games, and one of them was called Cluedo, and that was by Waddington. And this funny game, it kind of scared me, because you had to find out who the person was who had murdered and who was killed and where they'd been killed, and with all the weapons over there on this board. And the only thing that relieved it was kind of the names of the of the people, like Miss Scarlet and Colonel Mustard. And I thought, well, if you've got a name Mustard and Scarlet and all these funny names, it can't be too serious and scary. So that was how it went for me. And then I think that's this evening, it sort of slowly just came right for me that I was going to ask Natalie and Orna to speak, because I knew Natalie as a child. We used to, I don't know if you remember this, Natalie, but when we came back from CHOL, we would sort of take the similar paths home as kids. And then I knew that you were always in Bellville High School, and I wasn't. And then Orna, I met in Israel, and for many years we've been friends, and she'll tell you her story soon. So, it's kind of a very familiar and friendly feeling having both of you here. And it's also wonderful having all these lovely people in the Zoom meeting. Honestly, you're all great. And it's so nice that you've joined. Thank you so much. And a special thank you to you, Natalie, for getting up so early in the morning in Australia. So let's start with Orna. She's our first speaker. And her book is called A Spy in the Shadows. And it's recently been translated from Hebrew to English. Now, Orna is the daughter of Reva Kretzmar, she was, and Basil Sandler from South Africa. But she was born and brought up in Israel. She was a Mossad agent, and today she lives a much quieter life in the center of Israel. And I'm going to ask Orna to tell us how she came about writing her book, which is called A Spy in the Shadows, as I've said. And then afterwards, the second half, we'll get to Natalie. And in the meantime, Natalie is invited to have some tea or coffee or whatever, Natalie. So Orna, over to you. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm the non-South African here, but I'll do my best. I was born and raised in Israel. And as a young girl, I actually was 21 when I was recruited to the Mossad. And I was an agent Mossad for 26 years, doing quite a lot of things which people usually read about or see in movies. It's not exactly the same, but that's what it was. And when I left, I decided I needed like a psychology treatment, and I sat down. I'm not a writer, but I sat down and wrote a book, which was my first book. I then wrote another one, but this was my first book. And I wrote the story talking about my experience. And of course, the real story in the book isn't the truth, but it's very close to things that could have happened. And I can say now, today, that they are very similar also to the things that are happening in Israel today, with the Muslims and the problematic both sides of people living in Israel. And I won't tell you the story because you can read it. And but I decided to write that book, and since then I wrote that book and another book afterwards. And it was actually quite a good, I felt very good afterwards, because, I don't know, people who write can understand what it does to your soul and your mind. So I enjoyed it very much. I can't hear you.
Maybe you can just tell us a little bit about the story that you chose, to write about, and maybe kind of tell us a little bit about your life then as a mossad agent.
Okay, firstly about the book. The book tells the story about a young Israeli girl. She's the daughter of the Mossad, the head of the Mossad, and a Muslim guy, and they fall in love. And there's a whole big thing around it, and she's been kidnapped in Europe. And the whole thing of the Mossad actually finding her and trying to rescue her. I won't spoil the whole thing, but that's the whole story. In the Mossad, actually, I was there from the age of 21. I went through a course that took me over, I think it was about 18 months. And then I was sent with the group, and we were working, actually trying to get the Mossad. What it does, it gets information that Israel needs about her enemies. And I won't tell you exactly what I did, but we got into places, we got into computers, we recruited people, everything to do with getting that information in many, many, many ways. I don't know if I can just stand here and talk to you about what I really did, but I can say that for me as a young girl, it started as a very young girl, working very hard, actually not having a life, because you become very quiet and you're not allowed to talk to your friends and your family and people around you. So you become very quiet. And it's not easy for a young girl. But actually, I managed to find a guy, a divorcee with two kids, and I grabbed him. And I got married. And very quickly, I had my two daughters. And although I was a mother and I really enjoyed it, and I love my kids, I went back to work. And every time as my kids grew up, I found a way to deal with motherhood and working. At the beginning, for instance, I worked as a recruiter. And then when I had my kids, and then I was a teacher, and then I was a head of the courses that we were dealing with the next generation. And when they were old enough, I thought they were old enough. My eldest was 9. I decided they were old enough. And I took my whole family, and we lived in Paris. I was sent there. And I was actually not at home from Sunday till Friday for weeks on end. Sometimes I never came back on the weekend. And my kids were in Paris, and I was working. And life is very different as a mother. I'm not by myself anymore. And it wasn't easy. And I can say that I lost a lot as a mother for working at the place I worked at, because you never work at the place you live. You always have to leave your home and go and work somewhere else, in a different state, in a different country. It can be in Europe, it can be other countries. So I used to be away for weeks on end, away from my family. I did that for 4 years. And then I came back to Israel, and I decided that my family, suffered enough and I had to stop. So I went to study for the first time in my life because I never managed to go to university before. I went to university, and then I actually left my work after 26 years and did other things. And that's actually the story without telling much, but that's what it was.
How do you kind of understand that you wanted to do that? What do you think motivated you? Because
Actually
to
never
become a
knew where I
mossad.
was going. I never knew where I was going. I
Mm.
went to university at the beginning when I left the army, and I really hated it. I didn't have how do you call it, the tochas for it. And my brother was actually working for security. I didn't know exactly what. And I came and I complained to him, and I said to him, look, I'm suffering at university. I don't want to be there. And he said to me, you know what? They're looking for a woman to join a group. I said to him, where? He said to me, I can't tell you, but you have to trust me. It's to do with security in Israel, but I can't tell you more. So I looked at my brother and I said, you know what? Whatever you do to get me out of that university, go for it. And I never knew. And actually, I went through the recruitment. It takes time because they have to check you out, and they have to, you go through tests and stuff that people today go through more than they used to before. But I went through everything and I got in. And on Sunday, 8 o'clock, we came to this place where it was known to be the school of the Mossad. I never knew it. People then never knew things. Today, everybody knows everything. But we sat there, a bunch of guys. I think we were about 15 in that course. I was the only young girl there, woman. And the guy at the head of the table, when we started, he said, welcome to the Mossad. And I couldn't believe my ears because I read stuff about Eichmann and things like that about the Mossad, but I never had the clue or the thought that I was going to work for the Mossad. So the first time I knew about it was the first lesson or the first hour at the Mossad. So that's how it started. And actually, my brother at the time was in a classroom just next to me, studying to be an agent, a different kind of agent in the Mossad. And we were the only brother and sister in the Mossad at that time that went through the motions. So that's how it went.
Unbelievable. Really very unusual story for a young woman. And I wonder if your South African roots had anything to do with it, whether that was a positive or negative thing, taking somebody to the Mossad.
Firstly, no, South Africa wasn't the issue. The issue was, could I, be, could I speak in English or French or whatever? Could I have been, can I go undercover? Because I can't work as a Mossad agent as an Israeli. That's a no. So if you had a good English, which I had, it was a positive thing. Sometimes I had to change my accent because it's a bit too South African. I think until today, it's a bit, you can detect.
The kids of Israel, the kids of South Africans talk like you in Israel.
Yeah.
It's kind of, it's a different sort of accent from, but yeah. And your parents also got involved, I understood, or
My
not?
parents never knew. They never knew I was there. They were, they always asked me, but I couldn't say. And one day I come home and I see my father lying in bed with a book. And he says to me, aha, I know where you work. I said to him, where do I work? He said, you work for the Mossad. I said to him, how do you know? Why? From where? He said, I'm reading all the information in the book. about the Mossad and your way of life, I'm sure that you and your brother Ran are working there. So he knew without me telling him after a while. It took a few years. But that's the thing about working there, you know, firstly, as a young girl, I couldn't tell my parents. I couldn't tell my friends. I couldn't tell anybody. The only person I could talk to was my brother. And it's an amazing, and of course you have all your friends from the office and you talk to them and your people that you work with, but it's a very different thing to what and how I grew up, you know, with friends around me and family around me, and suddenly they were all gone because I couldn't handle it.
So what did you tell your parents?
They knew I worked for the Ministry of Defense. That's it. They didn't know what and why. That's what we needed to say, and that's what we said, and that was it. The minute you say Ministry of Defense, people don't ask you questions. Today they do, but back then they didn't.
Well, it's really fascinating, and I really recommend you to read Orna's book. She has many other stories to do with her life and her family's life in Israel, but it's really fascinating. And you know, you must have been, I think, extremely courageous to leave Israel and settle in France and travel all the time, and your children with your husband in Paris. Not easy. Anybody
you don't think about it.
Yeah,
It's something that doesn't cross your mind. You just live, you know, that's your life, and that's what you do. You don't think about all these things that people from the outside, you think about it, or maybe later you think about it. Because all of my life, that's what I did. A mission and another mission and another mission. That's how I lived. And you are scared because it's part of your tools, you know, I would call it being scared, but you know, you have to be very cautious. And so you use it as a tool, but it's not something that bothers you all the time.
Get used to everything.
Yeah, especially in Israel.
That's true. Thank you, Orna. Does anybody have questions for Orna? As I say, the book is called, let me get this right, A Spy in the Shadows. It's on Amazon. I'll send you all the link tomorrow, actually.
Hi, this is Karine, and I have so many questions because this is such a fascinating story. But I wanted to just to comment on what you said about how writing helps the spirit, helps the soul, and helps you process experience. And so you did that in this book, and I can't wait to read it. My question is, this first book was or was not detective fiction? And if only the second book was detective fiction, what made you decide to tell the story using the detective fiction genre?
Firstly, I'm not a writer. I'm a storyteller. So what does a person write about if they suddenly start writing? They write about their lives. And for me, my whole life is that. So I wrote about my life, and because I knew I had to go through a lot of censorships, you know, I went through 3 kinds of censorships to make sure that I didn't give anything up, you know, from real life. So I knew about it from the beginning. So I made up the story without giving, you know, the secrets. And for me, that's what it was. I mean, my life. And I told the story about the way I was living. And I enjoyed it. I really did. I actually, when I finished my book, I was very upset because suddenly I had to say goodbye to all these people around me that I made up in my mind. And it was very hard. My second book is actually not about the Mossad. It's about, can I tell them, Gail?
Sure, definitely.
It's actually about a story that happened to my family. I don't know how many of you know about the Yemenites in Israel and the kidnapping of the Yemenite kids. Do you know about it? Back in the 50s, a lot of kids, babies were taken. And my mother had a baby, and we're not Yemenites, and we what we call Ashkenazi Jews, which nobody thought it happened to. But my first sister was actually probably taken away. They told my mom that she died. And my whole story was about that period of time and the story of the disappearing of my sister, which we never found until today. And I haven't got a clue of what had happened to her because we have nothing, you know, not a death certificate, not a birth certificate, nothing. And that's what happened back then in Israel. And many, many, many kids were taken, and God knows where they are. Some were found, most of them not. So I wrote this fiction story about that time and our story, which is also fiction, but it's around that story.
Yeah, I think it's quite an amazing and frightening story that, you know,
Yeah.
because your sister had a name. She was born on a certain date, which you all knew. And your grandmother was here too from South Africa. And she knew about the birth of this little baby. And then 3 days later, the baby just simply disappeared from the maternity home.
Yeah.
And they never saw the body. They said that the child had died, etc. It's just absolutely frightening. And there your parents were in their early 20s, and they didn't understand what was going on, what had happened to them.
Right. And a
And
lot of people say to me, you know, you're a Mossad agent. How come you never found her? But we had
this is in
nothing
Israel.
to go on with. There
Mm.
was not a piece of paper, nothing that I could start looking for this baby, for this girl. I actually did find a few people or a few women that could have been my sister. And we went and we checked it, but they weren't. So we stayed with a question mark until today.
Yeah, and you know, this happened in Israel. Imagine the beginning of the state of Israel, 1951 it was. And it
Yeah.
happened to many families. Most of them were Yemenites, but there were some others, especially like, you know, Orna's family from Cape Town, actually. There were some others from South Africa, and they were all young couples. And this has been, there's been an investigation, and unfortunately, the evidence and all the evidence that was collected, it's now, you can't read it, right, Orna? It's locked or under whatever.
No, they don't really want to let us know what had happened. I don't know why. Maybe it's to do with the people who did it. Maybe it was the government who messed up. We have no idea of exactly what happened there. And there's a lot of information hidden from the public.
What do you think happened?
I think that it was, you know, the Yemenites who came to Israel were uneducated, a lot of kids in a family, and the Israelis, looking at them from high above, said, maybe we should help them and find them other homes.
Mm.
That's, you know, in my mind, it might be that. And it went and something went wrong there because suddenly a lot of people were taken and more people were taken and Ashkenazi people, kids were taken. And I found out that there was a price on a baby. It was $5,000 at that time in 51, 52. And I found out quite a lot of information, but I couldn't find out who had done it. It should have been, and it probably was, a group of people, but I have no idea who it was. And maybe it was somebody in the government that, you know, because why does the government hide all the information from the public after so many years? I have no idea.
Ah, terrible. I remember your father told me you used to stand with a picture of you, maybe, just
Yeah.
somewhere, and say, has anybody seen a child who looks like this?
I'm not sure if he showed her or my brother, because I'm not sure they had a picture of the baby at
No.
all.
No. Mm-hmm.
You know, she was in the hospital for, she was just born, and then you had no cameras, you know, at the hospital and stuff like that. I don't remember, but he went to people and he asked. He showed my picture. He showed, do you know somebody who looks like me? And that was one of the reasons that I wrote that book, and I went public with it, because one of the reasons I wanted to find the baby. The baby, she's older than me. She's an old lady now. But no, I even got to Canada and America, and I'm sure a lot of the kids are there. And I know some of the kids are there. Because of the kids that we did find. But it's a sad story.
Yeah. Anyway, thank you so much, Orna.
Pleasure.
It's every
Excuse
time
me.
I tell that, it's very sad.
Yeah.
What's the title of the second book?
It's actually her birth date,
Hmm.
27th of June, 1951. And it's not in English, so you can't find it. We only translated the other one. It's a big deal to translate from Hebrew to English. And I'm not a professional writer, you know, so I decided to leave it. But I gave the book that name because I said, if somebody was born on that day and has no idea where they came from, or she, maybe it will ring a bell. Maybe somebody will come to me, and it did. People did come to me, but it wasn't her. So that's the name of the book, and maybe it will be translated next, because we just translated my first book now. It's been up only for a few weeks in English, so it's a Hebrew book.
Okay. Thanks, Orna.
You're welcome.
Really appreciate it. Right, so now we'll move to Sydney, Australia. And Natalie, you're going to tell your story of how you got into crime writing and how come you chose the setting in South Africa, of South Africa. So hi.
Hi. Can you all hear me? Look, that's a hell of a hard act to follow. I don't have nearly as exciting a life. So I grew up in Bellville, and I came to Australia in the 70s to escape apartheid, but also my boyfriend had moved here and I followed him and sailed through Sydney Heads on a January morning, and it's a particularly beautiful place. And because I had hated apartheid so much, I wanted nothing to do with South Africa or South Africans. And I managed to successfully do nothing. And I didn't go back at all. I went back once to see my mother briefly, and then my mother came here. My father had died. And in 2011, so I came in 72, came here. In 2011, a couple of friends of mine said, oh, show us where you grew up. Let's go to Cape Town for a holiday. And I went to Cape Town, and when I saw the mountain and the city, I realized that I'd been ignoring an absolute seminal part of my life. It's my bone country. And I thought, God, you know, I know nothing about it. I really had avoided. I didn't read about it. I didn't talk to people. So I thought, okay, I've got to find out about this country. And at the same time, I'd had a career in education as a kind of administrator, and I'd actually lived in Paris for 6 months working for the OECD. So I'd been around, And one day I was talking on the phone to a friend, and we were talking about doing other things. And I said, oh, I'd like to write. And I put down the phone and I thought, yeah, I would. So I resigned the next day without giving myself time to tell myself, you don't have enough money, you won't be able to do it. Anyway, I did. And I thought, okay, what are you going to write about? And I'd always enjoyed reading crime fiction. So I thought, okay, I'll start off with some short stories. And I did. And, they were kind of taken up. And then I thought, well, you need the whole point about writing is you need to apply tohus to chair and leave it there for a few hours a day. And I didn't have that kind of discipline. So I thought, okay, so I did a master's in creative writing, cultural sort of studies. And I enjoyed it so much, I went on and did a doctorate in cultural and creative studies. And a creative doctorate, part of it is you do something creative and then you have an exegesis. Anyway, the creative part was a book. And my doctorate was on South African crime fiction post-apartheid, because when apartheid ended, crime fiction in South Africa suddenly shot up in popularity in an absolutely, what's the word I want, like stupendous way. And there were some fabulous crime writers in South Africa. And it was really interesting. I wanted to know more about it, and I wanted to think about Cape Town. So I started coming back to Cape Town a month at a time from about 2013. And I came, there's a book festival in Cape Town called Open Book, and I came and was sort of attended that and saw, my one friend I have left there, and kind of reacquainted myself with the town and learned about the new South Africa. So the first book that I wrote is called Present Tense. And when I was thinking about Cape Town, I was thinking, when I was in Cape Town, my cousin Mel was there and he introduced me to his friends, and they were mostly older, white, Jewish people mostly. And so I heard them talking about their experiences with the new South Africa. And although financially they've got clout, socially they kind of don't matter anymore. And that was a really interesting kind of idea. And also in Bellville High, the school I went to, there was a friend of mine who had been a policeman during apartheid and had carried on to be a policeman after apartheid. So I got hold of him and made him tell me stories, some of which I absolutely could not print. You would not believe me. And then I thought, okay, what would an ordinary bloke, an ordinary guy in his 50s say, who'd been a policeman during apartheid, done some things he wasn't that proud of? How would he negotiate the new South Africa? So I thought, okay, I'll call him Schalk Lourens. I don't know, those of you might have read the Herman Charles Bosman stories. Herman Charles Bosman is a South African writer who wrote a lot of short stories in the 40s, but they're set in the late 1890s, and his main guy is a guy called Schalk Lourens. Anyway, I decided to call my policeman Schalk Lourens, and I wrote Present Tense as part of this doctorate thing. So somebody sent my book to I didn't imagine it would get published. I didn't kind of write it for that. Like Orna, I didn't know what I was doing. Like, you just do it, you sit down and you do it. So somebody, another writer, a friend of mine, sent it to her agent, and the agent rang me up 4 days later and said, oh, I'd like to be your agent. And I thought, wow, how easy is this? This is terrific. Anyway, it took her a year to find a publisher, and we found a very small publisher, one-woman show really, and Present Tense was published. And initially it kind of sank because there was no money for publicity or any of that. But then it kind of got some very good reviews and it started to gain traction. And it was published in Australia. And so actually this year, Penguin took it up and was published in South Africa. Yeah, it's also on Kindle and stuff. And then just keeping on going, then I wrote a second book, also with Schalk, my hero, but he comes over to Sydney because the last time I had been to South Africa was in 2016, and South Africa changes so fast that I felt I wasn't qualified to write about it anymore. So I brought Schalk over to Sydney, and I wrote this book. I wrote Shadow City, which is available on Kindle, though I know my cousin Dov has had some trouble getting it on Kindle. And we, a bigger publisher, an imprint of Bonnier, took me up and gave me a 2-book contract. And they're also going to reissue Present Tense under a new cover in next month, in December. So, you know, here I am. I'm in my 70s. I've got an agent and publishers, and I'm writing away. Look, it's kind of ridiculous, but it's happening, and I'm loving it. I'm loving it's incredibly hard work, and it's incredibly frustrating. But Orna, you must have found this. There's a great pleasure and a discovery in writing. And people say, okay, why crime fiction? And I've thought about this a lot. And Orna, you say that your stories have made you sort of examine your life and your spirit. And crime fiction, in my head, lets you examine a society. It's always, because it's about breaking the law, crime, it's always about a group of people, a family or a city or a town. And it helped me understand Cape Town in a way that I kind of hadn't before. And it's a really, I don't know if you read it, it's a really, there's a fantastic South African crime writer called Mike Nicol, Nicol. And he says, if you want to know about a country, read its crime fiction. You'll get the idea and you'll enjoy the ride. So I try to make my books as enjoyable as possible. In present tense, the book starts with Schalk's ex-boss, who was a security guy in apartheid, is found necklaced. You know, the necklacing, we're putting the tie around your neck and setting it alight. And Schalk has to find out who did it. And at the same time, it's an election in South Africa, and it all gets kind of involved. So that's present tense. Shadow City, in which Schalk comes to Sydney, and he works with a South African cop, Jackie Rose, a woman. It has an underlying theme of slavery, and I don't want to make that sound like the book's so depressing and worthy, but there are millions of slaves all over the world, and this is kind of, it's some of it's in Cape Town, most of it's in Sydney, and it's about young women sold into slavery. So that's Shadow City, and I've just handed in my 3rd book, which is called Finding the Bones, which is totally set in Sydney, and which Sydney's got some pretty interesting past, and it's kind of examines, you know, what past crimes, the effect it has on other people. And the publishers have just got it. They like it, and they've commissioned a fourth book. So I'm going back to Cape Town in March to do some research for that book. And Orna, I would love to talk to you about mossad as well, if that's okay with you, as much as you can tell me. That's me, really. I'm happy to. Oh, and the other thing is the short stories. I kept on doing short stories, and they've just come out. The very first publisher, who's remained a good friend of mine, has just brought out a collection of the short stories. So I'm just here writing away, doing my thing.
Well, I think it's amazing also. I mean, my word amazing keeps coming up here, but really, Natalie, who would have thought? And I must tell you that there are quite a few people here at this Zoom meeting from Bellville, by the way. I think you know probably quite a lot. Linda Raskin, and there's
Yes.
Angela Strubis, I think it is. Angela. There are various people here, Cynthia Kadish, all from Bellville.
Where's Cynthia? Oh, she must be on another page. There's quite a lot of. Hi.
Anyway,
Oh,
it's
that's
amazing
Cynthia.
because, you know, we
Oh,
were the...
you look, sorry, Cynthia, no, you look exactly the
That's right.
same.
That's right. Mm.
Yeah, it's extraordinary.
It's all in the eye of the beholder. It's so nice to see you, Natalie. I would never have recognized you.
Yeah, I was a very fat kid.
I have a vision of you coming down the step at your mother's store, which was directly across from my dad's pharmacy, and I still see
That's
you
right.
there.
Yeah.
Oh,
Anyway,
God.
we were only 100 families in Bellville, so we all knew each other, I mean, you know, pretty well.
We did.
But I think it's amazing to, and there, oh, Rita Grevler's here also.
Where?
I don't know, she's somewhere. I can see she says, "Hi, Cynthia, from your neighbor." That's Rita.
Next door neighbors.
Yeah.
I
Exactly.
didn't think to tell, I've kind of mentioned this to my brother, but I didn't think to tell him to be here. But my brother's in Sydney, and we're very
Arnie.
close. Arnie's here. And I will certainly tell him all about this. It's amazing.
It is
It's
amazing.
fabulous.
And
Yes.
who would have thought that we'd have somebody writing crime fiction from Bellville? This is the point, you know.
Least
And
of all
imagine
me.
so many other things. But
Yeah.
that to me is just simply a miracle. You know. And then we've got people from Paro, Natalie. There's Stephanie Barelovitz here. Who else is here from Paro? Paro was our next door neighbor. But that it is remarkable. And I feel that you're telling us the story, you know, decades later. It's
Yeah.
amazing also that you got into this whole, you know, you had enough confidence and zitzfles, as they say, to sit down and do it.
No, it's all Zitzfleisch. Honestly, every time and this is, I'm not just being humble bragging. Every time I sit down, I think, I do not know what I'm doing. And you don't. There are two kinds of writers. There's plotters, people who plan everything, and then there's pantsers, those that write by the seat of their pants. I can't plan, so I just sit and I write, and then you go backwards and forwards and do it again and again and again. But if you, Orna's nodding, but if all I can say is that it feels right to do. That's all I would say. It's something I enjoy doing very much.
Seems like it. Oh, and my brother's here too, Stanley.
Yeah, I've said, but there he is, smiling.
It's amazing, you know, just to think that we all kind of know one another without having seen each other for decades and decades.
Yeah, and nobody knows you. It's really interesting. Those of you who've come from South Africa to other countries, people who knew you as a child know you in a way that your later friends do not.
That's right.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
Anyway, we're opening up the discussion now. There are people who'd like to speak to Natalie, ask questions. the little notes and chats on the side, Natalie, about people saying
Oh,
different things about, let's just see, Cynthia Tobias, and Rita said, Cynthia said she was hoping to see Arnie. Okay. And there's a note up here from Stephanie. That's before from Penzance in Cornwall, 5 minutes from the last railway station in England. That's where Stephanie lives now.
wow.
Yeah.
Well,
So maybe you can come and visit Israel.
I'd love to. I'd love to.
Maybe
Well,
we can have a get together of Bellville people to Israel.
or in
And
Sydney. I
somebody
have
to
to get
subsidize
your-
it.
Or in Sydney. It's pretty. If I hadn't been on this Zoom because it's summer here, I'd be swimming because I live fairly near the harbour, and I drive down and swim. It's like being in a flat sea swimming pool.
Oh, okay. Mm.
It's just very fascinating to hear, you know, a lot of the people on the Zoom write little stories, but there's a big jump from writing a little story to actually completing a big story. And so, you know, this is a very interesting, and it's very interesting how each of you took a slightly different route, but found yourselves in the same place, and how much you're enjoying it. And I like the idea, Orna, when you said when you finished the book, you felt sad that you'd lost all these people. So, Natalie, do you find in a way that writing about the same person helps you because you don't have to say goodbye? You can continue
Yeah.
the next story.
It does. And also people who read the book say, oh, you know, when are we going to hear another story about Schalk? But I like him and I enjoy, yes, it's much easier. Apropos of how hard it is, the second book took me 3 years to write because we had COVID in the middle and I was totally paralyzed during COVID. So that was really hard. And somebody asked me if I enjoy writing, and I said, no, but I enjoy having written. It's actually, it's kind of a slog, but it's very, it's interesting.
I wonder how writers manage to write a book before the era of cut and paste.
Or Google.
And Google.
Yeah, you know.
Because I know when I write even just documents, how you go over it and you comb it and you change it and you move the paragraphs around, and it's just so nice to do it and easy.
Yes, and I think I think you write differently. I've got friends who write in longhand, and they say it gives them time to think while they write. When you type, you're going much faster, and it's a whole different experience.
I must say that I read your book, Natalie, and I found it totally fascinating, and it helped me get over a really tough patch here. I couldn't put it down. I'm not a fantastic Kindle reader. This was on Kindle, but I just found it totally fascinating. It's so well written. It's just like,
Thank you.
Like you kind of can't wait to get to the next chapter, and you're just wondering. And then it's not so easy to go to the end in Kindle because then you, but I wanted to see what happened at the end. So I read the whole thing, in order.
There are bits and pieces that are from my experiences. Dorf will point out. I've got an address there that was an address of my cousin Mandy, and there were places in Bellville. I mean,
yes, you
Schalk
said
Lourens,
Fatty's and
Bellville, like
Mandy's.
me, yeah. And various other things like that.
Yeah, but it was, the character, Schalk Lourens. I mean, I could just feel this guy. I knew exactly who he was. And he reminded me of so many people I had known once, sort of growing up. A very, very sort of interesting character he is.
That's great.
And how was it that you chose the same name as the previous writer? And is there a connection?
Osman.
Well, I was just walking and it popped in my head, and I thought, well, the Schalk Lourens stories, if you haven't read them, you really have to. They're amazing. They're quite satirical, but they're very simple, like Mark Twain-y sort of stories. But Bosman himself was quite complicated. He was put in jail for shooting dead his stepbrother or his brother-in-law. And I thought, oh, well, I've got to give the guy a name. I'm very sorry now. I called him Schalk because nobody except South Africans can pronounce it. People are always saying Schalk. And so in the next book, I had a whole section of somebody, learning to pronounce his name. But it's anyway, he's Schalk now. It was just a kind of whim, really.
Just a comment from purely personal point of view. Natalie's first book, obviously I quell because it's my baby cousin who's written this book. But I found it fascinating how she'd interwoven addresses and scenarios which were part of my life and which I was familiar with. I felt like part of the story almost. My only problem is now, thank you, Kindle, I can't download her new book for some reason. They've got it in for me.
I just don't know. If any of you have a problem downloading, if you're going to read Shadow City, it's called Shadow City. If you ever have problems downloading it, could you just contact me? I've put my email on the chat column because the publishers checked it out and they say everything's okay, but it just can't understand why Dove can't download it.
I can download a sample. It allows
But
me to
not the
download a
actual
sample,
book.
but I cannot purchase the book.
Okay.
So there must be a problem.
It's either just about on Audible or on Audible.
I've
But it
tried,
should
I've
be.
tried Amazon and I've tried Kindle.
Okay, so if anybody else has problems, please let me know and I'll go back.
Okay. Margaret.
Yes. What I find interesting about this, Natalie, is that I don't think a girl like me who grew up in Rondebosch could even conceive of a character called Schalk Lourens. And I think that this is very interesting because so many of you come from Bellville or Parow and had that sort of interaction with Afrikaans people. And you said actually you had a policeman friend of yours. I mean, I just can't, it's very hard for me to see how that could have come about in my life, if you know what I mean, that I would even be able to do it.
Yeah, but look, there would be other things that you would be able to do. Yeah, I mean, I went Bellville High. I did my high school, the whatever you called it, in English, and some subjects I did in Afrikaans. But there won't be a Schalk Lourens, but there will be some other Cape Town thing.
Yeah,
and
all right, or a Vilna Jew or something like that. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it was just what I had, and look.
I mean, I'm just amazed. It's not so far away from where I live, Bellville, if you know what I mean. And I think that's what's really interesting, and why this group has a kind of richness because of people having come from the sort of, they weren't even country towns. They were just, what would you call them even?
Well, in Cape Town, they call them behind the Boerewors curtain.
Yeah.
it is extraordinary. I think that the demographics, you know, of South African communities is very interesting. And every place, whether Durbanville was right next to Bellville, completely different. Parow was very different from Bellville, actually. And once one lived there and you went through it, and you had to sort of integrate quite a lot more than I think you know it happened in the southern suburbs or whatever.
Right.
So, and yet it was slightly more sophisticated than some of the other areas around it. So you got this coming through, and that's very interesting, because actually Natalie went to a different high school from what I went to, but I knew exactly what was going on there. So, you know, it's just like part of your family in a way.
But
But you're
it was
right,
very interesting.
it's different.
Sorry,
Yeah.
growing up in Bellville, you were kind of in the provinces. You weren't, you know, Sea Point and Rondebosch were like the most sophisticated, coolest, desirable people that, you know, you were never going to kind of be like. And when, you know, we all joined Habonim, and we'd go to some kind of event where you all were, and we just gaze at you, you know, you were cosmopolitan and we were from Bellville. So that's the way I saw it when I was growing up.
That's true. Okay, well, time for coffee and cheesecake.
Or breakfast.
Or breakfast. So thank you, everybody, for a lovely, lovely meeting. Next week we have another seminar which we'll write to you about. If there's anybody else who wants to say something.
I think Sally wanted to say something. Sally?
Sally?
Sorry, it was only just really a comment that, hello, Natalie, you made it sound so easy. I gave up my job, and then I wrote a book, and then I got an agent, and then I got a publisher, and then Penguin picked it up, and now I've got another book. It's just an incredible success story. I just wanted to say congratulations.
Look, nobody is, and truly no one is more surprised than I am. Trust me.
Yeah. Lovely. And Liebe, you
yes, am I on? Yes, I just want to say I kind of shudder to think what you people must have thought of Maitland. we were the poor relatives.
Yeah.
Anyway, I think you mentioned before my nephew Philip Stodel is writing a comprehensive history of the Maitland Jewish community. He's gone into lots and lots of detail about it. So watch for it. I guess it's still in the making. It'll still take a while.
But it's on the CHOL website under Maitland in communities, so you can watch it building as Philip gets on with it. So thank you to Liebe and Philip for doing that.
Sure, you're welcome. Take care, everyone. I enjoyed being with you all.
Thank you. Thanks, Gail, for organizing it.
With pleasure. And I'm so happy to have seen you all and to spoken. I feel, you know, it's been a lovely meeting. And we'll continue.
Yeah,
we're not going to say goodbye now. It's just a lehitraot.
So thank you, Gail, for doing it.
Thanks for joining us, Sally. Sally has lovely writing workshops. If anybody wants her details, I'll send it to you. I just really, really love them. Seriously, Sally.
Have you got one in Cape Town in the beginning of January? I'm hoping to be.
She does it on Zoom.
Oh, I see. You don't have to go to
lovely,
Cape Town.
Really.
Anyway, I'm hoping to be there for a few days at the end of January. If anybody knows of anything interesting happening in Cape Town, it will be really nice to know.
And I'm going to be there for a month from the middle of March to the middle of April, and would love to catch up with some of you.
Wherever you are. So thank you, Gail, so much. It's been a lovely meeting all the Bellville people and seeing how well they've done. So thank you very much. And hopefully we'll see you next week. I think the meeting is on Wednesday. And Gavin Baynard Smollen, who's done this whole project on cookbooks, is talking about how people found each other, how South Africans found each other during and after the Holocaust through I don't know, the Board of Deputy. I'll send you the details of it. It'd be really interesting to see you, and hope you'll come to that next week.
And maybe I'll just end off by saying, if anybody from Bellville wants to write a little bit about their families and send them to Stanley, just a few lines, a paragraph, it'll be very useful and I think, important.
Stanley's doing a wonderful website for Bellville, and all your stories will really fill it out beautifully. So yes, please do. Very
Okay.
nice. So enjoy
I'll
the
say
website.
Lila Tov. Bye-bye. Good night. Thanks to you and Orna. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.